So what is Jesus teaching here in verse 52? This is not the primary point here, but there are those who will come to verse 52 and teach a doctrine called pacifism, which is that Christians should never bear arms. We should bury our swords. We should not be defensive, and especially not offensive. We should just trust the Lord to take care of us. And so get rid of your guns, get rid of your swords, get rid of your knives, etc., based upon this, because if you live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. Which, by the way, is pretty much still true. I mean, if that's how you engage in life, it probably what comes around, goes around, comes around, however that saying goes, That is a principle. But Jesus is not teaching pacifism. He did not say, why do you have a sword, or throw your sword away? Jesus knew they had swords, right? Do you remember that? Earlier in the evening, they actually asked Jesus, should we get some swords? They still didn't understand the nature of his kingdom. And they said, we have 2 swords. And what did Jesus say? That's enough. That's in Luke 22. 2 swords, that's enough. And from what I've read, it was common for those who traveled together to have at least a couple of swords among them. Not all of them, but because there was danger in traveling. And so that's what Jesus had in mind, a source of protection from evil people who would seek to accost them. By the way, to apply this to a place like Haiti, the killing that's going on there is not because people are Christians. In other words, it's not religiously motivated in that sense. And in my opinion, the brethren ought to defend themselves. And there ought to be a government that comes in to defend them. You see, there is a place for the sword, isn't there? Jesus through the Apostle Paul did teach this in Romans 13 and verse 4. For those who are appointed in positions of power, government, he's God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. And I think there is implication. It's God's wrath against those who are doing the things like are happening down in Haiti. God is not pleased with that. There is a righteous anger. And there is a sword that should be borne against those who are doing such a thing. So Jesus is not saying that sword should not be any part of the Christian mindset or life. Jesus is actually saying the sword is not to be used in the advancement of his kingdom. I mean, it's really what he is saying is the nature, and he's teaching this, though that he didn't understand it yet, the nature of his kingdom is not going to be about spreading religious dominance by physical coercion or military force. This connects with what Brother Stewart said in the last hour. That's the Jews' mindset. We're looking for someone who's going to lead us in some sort of political uprising, and that is not the nature of the kingdom of God. No, brethren, the gospel of Christ is the power of God. The sword is not the power of God. The gospel of Christ is the power of God unto salvation. Foolishness to the world is the power of God's wisdom, the wisdom of God. And it's the sword of the Spirit that reaches the heart and transforms lives and cultures to the glory of God. But in verse 53, here's where Jesus begins to drive what I think the point of this passage is.